Wow, okay, this is quite a collection of sources you've sent in. Revolution Capitalism and kind of like where we're headed as a society. Looks like we've got excerpts from a few of Byung-Chul Han's books.
Huh.
Let's see, The Agony of Eros, Psychopolitics, The Transparency Society. Oh, and even some of his writings on the refugee crisis. Actually, I'm really interested in these pieces from Capitalism and the Death Drive. What made you want to explore this topic? Was it just personal interest, or maybe you're getting ready for like a big presentation? Hmm, keep that in mind as we go through this together, because one of Han's main arguments is that, well, it's pretty wild actually. He thinks revolution is basically impossible in today's world.
It's really interesting how Han brings all these different ideas together. I mean, whether he's talking about refugees or, our digital lives, he's trying to show us these like hidden forces that are shaping how we think and act. And when it comes to revolution, he says that neoliberal capitalism is so stable because it's so good at resisting it.
So it's not like the old days when you had like,
Haha.
the big bad boss and the workers all ready to revolt.
Right, exactly. Han says that older model of repression, well, it's different from what he calls like the seductive power of our current system. Think about it for a second. We're all supposed to be these entrepreneurs of ourselves. We're always trying to, optimize and perform and be our own bosses. But does that really ring true for you? Do you ever feel like you're the one exploiting yourself, in this
Yeah.
constant chase for self-improvement?
It's like we're all on this hamster wheel, just always pushing for more and more and more.
That's exactly what Han's getting at. The fight has moved inside us now. Instead of joining together against like a common enemy, we're battling ourselves. We blame ourselves for not achieving enough. And it's this constant feeling of not being good enough that makes it so hard to do anything together. The kind of collective action you'd need for a real revolution.
It's almost like we're addicted to our own exploitation. It's everywhere, right?
Right.
Like take data privacy, for example. It used to be that people would protest against data collection. They saw it as a huge invasion of privacy. But now, we willingly give up everything, our thoughts, our location, even what we ate for lunch. It makes you wonder, is this really freedom or just a new, sneakier way of controlling us?
That's a great question to think about, especially as we get into Han's analysis of the death drive. He argues that capitalism's endless need for growth, well, it's actually driven by a fear of death.
That's a pretty bleak outlook. But he brings in this really interesting example. It's from the story Peter Schlemiel. The main character sells his shadow, which Han says represents mortality, in exchange for, unlimited wealth. That's quite a metaphor. Is he saying that we're all making this Faustian bargain, trading our humanity for the promise of endless wealth and productivity?
Han definitely connects this to the burnout that so many of us feel, in our hyper-connected, always-on world, this constant pressure to optimize and perform. It ends up being self-destructive. We sacrifice our well-being, even our lives, for the sake of productivity. And it all goes back to that fear of death, the fear of our own limits that capitalism is so good at exploiting.
Yeah, it really does feel like that sometimes. Trapped in this system. And it's like feeding off of our deepest fears. And, speaking of traps, Han's analysis of the Transparency Society really got to me. It's like there's all this pressure to be totally transparent online. Like we have to create this perfect persona where everything is positive and polished. Have you ever felt that? Like you can't just be yourself online. You have to be this idealized version of yourself.
It's so interesting what Han says about transparency. He says that it actually gets rid of negativity and difference. When we try to make everything smooth and consumable, easily digestible, we end up kind of flattening out all the complexities of life, both online and offline.
It's like we're living in a digital panopticon, always watching ourselves and everyone else. Han even says that we're the ones building this panopticon. By giving up our data so willingly, we let ourselves be tracked and monitored. It's not Big Brother watching us anymore. We're doing it to ourselves.
And that leads to a whole new kind of control. It's insidious. We internalize this gaze. We're constantly censoring ourselves, trying to fit in with these unspoken rules. It's like we've forgotten how to be offline, to have private thoughts and feelings that we don't share and judge instantly.
Okay, so we have this system. It's fueled by our fear of death. It encourages us to exploit ourselves, and then it traps us in this web of transparency and self-surveillance. So where does the agony of Eros fit into all of this? Because Han gets pretty intense when he talks about how even theater has become dominated by pornography. I mean, what does that say about our attention spans and our craving for instant gratification?
Han makes this really fascinating distinction between eroticism and pornography. Eroticism for him is slow and seductive and elusive. There's mystery involved, a gradual unfolding of desire, like a slow burn, right?
Oh, yeah. True.
But pornography is direct and immediate. There's no mystery. It's all about instant gratification, just consuming the image without any lingering questions. And Han sees the shift from the erotic to the pornographic as a symptom of our broader cultural obsession with speed and efficiency and instant consumption.
He uses this example from Robert Mapplethorpe's photography, and it really stuck with me. He talks about how some of Mapplethorpe's earlier work is considered pornographic, but his later photos, even the ones with nudity, they shift into this realm of the erotic. It's because he introduces distance, a barrier. Like he'll focus on the fabric of underwear or the way light and shadow play on the body. It's still sensual, but there's this element of mystery, of suggestion, that makes it feel more erotic. Makes you think about how art can either reveal or conceal, and how the act of concealing can actually make desire stronger.
And this is where it gets really interesting in relation to Han's overall argument. If our current system thrives on transparency, on laying everything bare on instant gratification, then could this loss of eroticism, this loss of mystery and slowness, be another symptom of a deeper societal problem?
So if we go back to that first question about revolution, is Han saying that this system is so good at channeling our energy and desires into these individualistic pursuits that it makes collective action almost impossible?
Han thinks that any real change has to start with a revolution of consciousness, like a fundamental shift in our values and priorities. He talks about restoring the balance between life and death, embracing the parts of life that capitalism tries to repress or deny. You know, those messy, unpredictable, even painful parts of being human?
And that's where Eros comes back in, right? Because for Han, it's not just about sex. It's this vital life force, this energy that embraces intensity, excess, even pain. It's about connecting with something bigger than ourselves, something that goes beyond the limits of the neoliberal self. So where do you see Eros or its absence in our culture? It's something to really think about. Because Han suggests that Eros might be the key to a different kind of future.
Yeah, it's like we're all searching for that that connection, something to kind of wake us up from this consumer trance. It's interesting because in some of Han's other work, like what he wrote about the refugee crisis, you see this tension between the global and the local, and between the forces of capitalism that want to make everything the same, and that very human need for like individual identity and belonging. He's even critical of the idea of a unified Europe. He says it's become this abstract economic thing that wipes out differences and just creates resentment.
It seems like he's touching on something really deep there. He's saying that real community, real solidarity, it can't be forced on people from above. It has to come from shared experiences, from shared values, a feeling of being rooted in a specific place and time.
So instead of trying to force everyone into this, homogenized, globalized mold, we need to allow for more diversity, more expressions of what's unique and specific, to celebrate those differences instead of trying to erase them.
Exactly. He even talks about his own experience as an immigrant, how he came to embrace Germany as his home, but still held on to his Korean heritage. It's not about getting rid of differences. It's about finding ways to coexist, to learn from each other, to make each other's perspectives richer.
It's like that saying unity and diversity. And it makes me think about how we often try to reduce these complex issues to just simple economic calculations. Like when he talks about the refugee crisis, Han pushes back against this idea that we should only accept refugees if it benefits us economically. He's saying human dignity and compassion, they can't be measured in terms of profit and loss.
He argues that we need to reclaim a sense of reason, one that's based in ethics, and a real concern for the well-being of others. Not just cold, calculated self-interest. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our interconnectedness.
It's like he's calling for a more humane, a more empathetic way of being in the world. And honestly, it's refreshing, especially in a system that often feels so dehumanizing. But if Han's right, and this system is so good at absorbing resistance, at channeling our energy into these individualistic pursuits, then what hope is there for real change? I mean, where do we even start?
That's the big question, isn't it? Han's work doesn't give us any easy answers, or like a step-by-step guide, but it does give us a powerful way of understanding the forces that shape our world, forces that often work beneath our conscious awareness.
It's like he's handing us a scalpel and saying, okay, now that you see how it works, what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And that's where your own critical thinking comes in. Han's work is like a starting point, a catalyst for you to explore further. He's encouraging us to wrestle with these big questions, to imagine new possibilities, to find our own ways toward a future that's more just and humane.
And maybe, just maybe, that future involves rediscovering the power of Eros. Not just as a sexual force, but as this life-affirming energy that can fuel our creativity, our compassion, and our ability to act together. So if revolution needs eros, if it needs that spark of passion and connection, what would an erotic revolution even look like? It's something worth thinking about. As you continue to explore these ideas, it's certainly given me a lot to think about, and I hope it does the same for you.